Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. Picture a quiet pond in the wooded hills east of Troy, New York. It is July of 1908, and two boys are camping nearby when they notice something in the water. At first, they cannot make sense of it. Then the shape turns and the terrible reality becomes clear. A young woman is floating in Teal's pond. On the bank sit a hat and a pair of gloves, almost as though she placed them there herself. The dead woman was Hazel Irene Drew, a 20-year-old domestic servant whose final days would become almost impossible to reconstruct. Witnesses placed her at a railway station on a country road and near the pond. Others described unfamiliar men, a yellow wagon, and behavior that seemed suspicious only in hindsight. Yet no one could explain why Hazel had traveled there, who she planned to meet, or what happened before she entered the water. Hazel came from a working-class family in Rensselaer County. Like many young women of her time, she found employment in domestic service, living in or near the households where she worked. It was respectable work, but it could also be isolating. A servant moved through the private lives of wealthier families while keeping much of her own life invisible. That distance would later give newspapers and investigators plenty of room to speculate about Hazel. By the summer of 1908, Hazel was working in Troy, an industrial city built along the Hudson River. Troy was busy, crowded, and connected by rail to communities throughout the region. Beyond it, the landscape changed quickly. Roads climbed toward smaller settlements, farms, forests, and summer boarding houses. Teal's Pond lay near Taborton Road, several miles from the city and much closer to the rural world Hazel had known growing up. The known timeline begins on Monday, July 6th. Hazel abruptly left her position in Troy. Exactly why remains uncertain. Some accounts suggested she had given notice, while others made the departure sound sudden and unexplained. What is clear is that she arranged for her trunk to be shipped to her parents. That detail matters. Sending a trunk home suggests planning, but it does not tell us what she intended to do next or whether she expected to follow it. Hazel did not simply return home with her belongings. Instead, she moved through Troy carrying or checking other luggage, and investigators later tried to trace each step. A suitcase associated with her would eventually be found in the baggage room at Union Station. So let's back up a second. Her trunk was going to her parents, but her suitcase remained at the station. Was she preparing for another trip, waiting for someone, or changing plans as the day unfolded? The next day, Tuesday, July 7th. Witnesses reportedly saw Hazel at Troy's Union Station. Railway stations were crowded, transitional places, full of brief encounters and imperfect memories. A person could arrive, wait, leave, and return without drawing much attention. Only after Hazel's death did ordinary observations become possible evidence. By then, witnesses were trying to remember clothing, companions, expressions, and times from several days earlier. That is where certainty began to slip. Some accounts placed Hazel alone at the station. Other statements raised questions about whether she expected to meet someone or travel elsewhere. Investigators examined possible destinations and people she may have known, but no confirmed itinerary emerged. The suitcase she left behind became one of the case's most haunting objects. It suggested interrupted travel, but interruption can mean many things. Hazel may have meant to collect it later. She may also have believed she was coming back. Later that day, witnesses reported seeing a young woman believed to be Hazel walking along Taborton Road near Teal's Pond. The road wound through a sparsely populated area where travelers stood out more than they would in Troy. If the identification was correct, Hazel had made her way from the city into the countryside. But how? The surviving accounts never produced a single reliable route explaining every stage of that journey. And then there were the men beside the yellow wagon. Witnesses described two men near the pond acting in a way that seemed unusual or evasive. The exact details varied as the story spread, but their presence became central to public suspicion. Who were they? Were they connected to Hazel? Or were they simply travelers whose behavior gained sinister meaning after a body was found? Investigators could not establish an answer strong enough to support an arrest. This is one of the hardest things about old unsolved cases. A detail can be both important and dangerously unstable. A yellow wagon is memorable. Two strangers behaving oddly are memorable. But memory changes once a witness learns that a murder occurred nearby. Innocent gestures can begin to look calculated. Uncertainty turns into confidence. Newspapers repeat the most dramatic version, and before long, a possibility starts sounding like a fact. Hazel's movements after the reported sighting on Taborton Road are unknown. There is no verified account of her entering a house, boarding another train, or meeting a named companion. At some point, she reached the area around Teal's Pond. Whether she went willingly, was brought there, or had arranged to meet someone remains unresolved. The setting was secluded enough for violence, but not so remote that a wagon or pedestrian would necessarily pass unnoticed. 4 days later, on Saturday, July 11th, the boys camping near the pond found her body. The discovery immediately transformed a missing young woman into the victim of a homicide. Authorities recovered Hazel from the water and began trying to identify her. Decomposition and the effects of immersion complicated the first examination, but her clothing and personal circumstances helped connect the body to the servant who had recently vanished from Troy. An autopsy found that Hazel had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of her head. The injury indicated that she had been struck with a heavy object. This was not treated as an accidental drowning. Someone had attacked her, and the pond had become either the site of the killing or the place where her body was left. The weapon was never conclusively identified, and the available evidence did not reveal who delivered the fatal blow. Now here's where it gets strange. Hazel's hat and gloves were found on the bank. Investigators did not report clear signs of a violent struggle in the immediate area. There was no obvious scene showing where she had fought for her life. The neatly separated belongings created several possibilities. Perhaps she removed them before approaching the water. Perhaps someone arranged them afterward, or perhaps the actual assault occurred somewhere else, and the pond was used to conceal her body. Each possibility creates another question. If Hazel removed the hat and gloves herself, why? Was she resting, meeting someone, or expecting to remain near the pond? If another person placed them there, was the arrangement meant to suggest suicide or an accidental fall? And if she was killed elsewhere, how was she transported without leaving a clearer trail? The case contained physical clues, but none of them pointed in only one direction. The condition of the body also made timing difficult. Hazel had last been reliably traced several days before the discovery, leaving a gap during which almost anything could have happened. Investigators had to rely heavily on witnesses who had not known at the time that they were observing the final hours of a murder victim. Their estimates of time and place were therefore crucial, but also vulnerable to ordinary human error. Authorities searched Hazel's belongings and reviewed her correspondence. Letters became a major focus because they seemed to offer access to relationships she may have kept private. Investigators wanted to know whether she had a sweetheart, a secret appointment, or a conflict hidden from her family and employers. Yet the letters did not produce a clear suspect. References could be ambiguous, names incomplete, and ordinary affection easily recast as scandal by an eager press. Newspapers covered the investigation intensely. Hazel's youth, the rural pond, the mysterious journey, and the unidentified men made the case irresistible. Reports often emphasized supposed secrets in her social life. Some portrayed her as an innocent working girl. Others hinted that she lived a hidden double life among wealthier or more influential acquaintances. Those claims attracted readers, but publicity did not make them true. Much of Hazel's private world remained unverified. Class shaped the story in uncomfortable ways. As a domestic servant, Hazel entered households where she might hear private conversations and meet people outside her own social circle. That allowed reporters to imagine powerful men concealed behind the investigation. It also made Hazel easy to judge. Her independence, travel, or friendships could be presented as suspicious behavior. The question of who killed her was often tangled with arguments about what kind of young woman she had been. A formal inquest examined the available evidence. Witnesses were questioned about station sightings, road encounters, letters, travel plans, and Hazel's acquaintances. The proceeding was widely publicized, but the testimony did not settle the central timeline. One person's account could conflict with another's. A sighting might place Hazel in one location at a time when someone else believed she was elsewhere. Even the apparently simple task of tracing her route became a maze. Investigators considered people from different parts of Hazel's life, including friends, possible romantic interests, employers, and men reportedly seen near the pond. But suspicion is not proof. No one was tied to the fatal weapon. No reliable witness described the attack. No confession was established. And no physical evidence connected a specific person to the blow at the back of Hazel's head. The inquiry generated names, yet never produced a prosecutable case. The yellow wagon remained one of the most discussed leads. In a rural area, a wagon could explain how Hazel or her body reached the pond. But yellow wagons were not unique, and descriptions offered after the discovery were difficult to test. If investigators identified possible owners, they still needed to show that a particular wagon was present at the relevant time and connected to Hazel. That bridge between intriguing detail and courtroom evidence was never built. The suitcase at Union Station posed a different problem. Unlike a witness memory, it was a tangible object directly connected to Hazel, but an object can tell you only so much. Its presence showed that her journey was unfinished, at least in the form she had planned. It could not say whether she left the station for a brief meeting, intended to return the same evening, or had been persuaded to change her destination entirely. There were also practical limits to an investigation in 1908. Detectives could compare statements, search locations, inspect belongings, and question suspects, but modern forensic tools did not exist. There was no genetic testing, no digital trail, no surveillance footage, and no reliable way to map a person's movements through telephone or financial records. Once the immediate scene failed to yield a weapon or obvious attacker, the case depended heavily on testimony, and testimony was exactly where the investigation was weakest. People disagreed about when Hazel had been seen, what she wore, and whether she was alone. Some reports may have involved sincere cases of mistaken identity. Others may have been distorted as journalists competed for new revelations. The more famous the murder became, the more people came forward with stories. Instead of sharpening the picture, those additions often made Hazel's final days harder to see. Eventually, the inquest ended without an arrest. Public attention moved on, as it usually does, but the unanswered questions remained in the communities around Troy and Taborton. Why did Hazel leave her job when she did? Why send her trunk home but leave a suitcase at the station? Who, if anyone, was she meeting near Teal's pond? And were the two men in the yellow wagon central to the crime, or merely a haunting coincidence? Over the decades, retellings introduced theories involving secret lovers, prominent men, family disputes, and strangers on the road. None has been proven. That distinction matters because an unsolved case invites us to fill silence with narrative. A theory can make scattered clues feel orderly, but Hazel's case has resisted that order for more than a century. The honest answer is that the surviving evidence cannot identify her killer with confidence. The murder also gained an unexpected place in popular culture. Writer and television producer Mark Frost had family connections to the region and heard the local story surrounding Hazel Drew. Elements of that story later became part of the imaginative background that helped inspire Twin Peaks, the series he created with David Lynch. The resemblance is not a direct retelling, but the echo is clear, a young woman's death revealing mysteries beneath a seemingly quiet community. That connection introduced Hazel to generations who had never heard her name, but it can also blur the boundary between fiction and the real person at the center of the case. Hazel was not a character designed to carry secrets for an audience. She was a 20-year-old woman making plans that now survive only as fragments: a shipped trunk, an abandoned suitcase, reported footsteps along a country road, and personal belongings resting beside dark water. Today, Teal's Pond remains linked to the crime, even though time has altered the landscape and memory has reshaped the story. The hat and gloves still stand out because they seem deliberate. But we do not know whose decision placed them there. The station sighting feels like a beginning, while the pond feels like an ending. Between them lies the missing portion of Hazel's life that investigators could never recover. So when we ask what happened to Hazel Drew, we are left with a narrow foundation of fact. She left her job, sent her trunk home, passed through Troy, and was reportedly seen near Taborton Road. Days later, she was found murdered in Teal's Pond. Beyond that, nearly every path contains uncertainty. The case endures not because it lacks clues, but because its clues refuse to form one reliable story. Someone knew why Hazel traveled toward the pond. Someone may have watched her remove those gloves or place them on the bank after she was dead. That knowledge disappeared with the killer, and perhaps with witnesses who never understood what they had seen. More than a century later, Hazel's murder remains officially unsolved. Held in that uneasy space between documented history, local legend, and questions that may never receive an answer. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.